He's a freelance presenter for Sky Sports and Premier Sports, to name just two, and he also runs production company MPE Media. Here is episode 3 of Rich's Sport Media Show with Graham Little. Graham, thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
Hey Richard, I'm very well, thanks mate.
You're obviously an experienced freelance broadcaster. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Yeah, I suppose I'm reasonably experienced by now, purely with the fact that I'm getting really old, especially for this industry. I started off, I suppose I always had some sort of journalism ambitions. I always enjoyed writing and I always enjoyed English, and I can hardly add up, so I was hopeless at maths, so it was a good job that I was all right at English. And I remember at age 11, I'd written, ideas for the future and in some school project, and journalism was in there. It was a close second to professional football, however, and probably at that stage, both of those ideas seemed quite far away and unrealistic. But obviously, I had some idea that I wanted to write or create or do something like that for a living. And really, that was about it. At that point, I ended up. I wanted to be in the Marines. I wanted to do other adventures. I just wanted to have fun, really, and I wanted to avoid at all costs a proper job. And then I suppose later at university, I went to Loughborough University in England, and by about my second year there, I decided the military certainly wasn't for me. It didn't suit my personality in one way at all, in any shape or form. And I had to kind of go back then to the other idea, which was working in the media. And I partly the motivation, I think, was that I realized that was a window into a world that not many people get to see or get to be part of. It was all very well going to sports events that I really enjoyed and going to music events or just being at any sort of a drama. But I felt that being in the media was one step closer to the action. If I couldn't play rugby for Ireland, at least I could go and report on people playing rugby for Ireland and get to watch them training and meet them and get a better seat than I could otherwise afford when I had no money as a student. So I started to take it a little bit more seriously then. In my second year, I started a radio show with a good friend of mine, John Lark. It was called The Little and Lark Show, which is cringeworthy now to listen back to, but we thought it was hilarious at the time and were amazed that nobody had picked us up beyond Loughborough Campus Radio. I started writing for the student magazine there, which was called Label. And again, there's an element of luck in everybody's career, no matter what people tell you. And the first day I walked into the Label magazine, I just knocked the door and walked in and said, look, I want to try and write some articles and just be a part of this part of the burgeoning media empire of Loughborough University. And they said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, I study English and sport. I kind of like sport, but I have huge wide range of interests. And they said, well, our sports editor has just resigned. Do you want to be the sports editor? And I had only been in the room 30 seconds. So I said, yeah, no problem. So overnight, I became the sports editor of the Student Union magazine. So there was an element of luck, but also you've got to knock the door for that luck to present itself. So I did that for another, for my final 2 years at university. Also began doing a bit of travel writing when I was there, and just really sort of starting to knock doors and trying to work out how the industry worked and finding work experience and just trying to push my way in. Really, I've never been backwards about coming forwards. Usually, if I have an idea that I want to do something, then I'm never too ashamed to ask for help or to try to find out how it works and give it a go, which I think is a very important trait in media. It's a very important trait in life in general, but in media in particular. You need to have a little bit of a brass neck to push yourself forward and to be prepared to try things, and also be prepared to make mistakes and not be very good at it and have people laughing at you or critiquing you. And that hurts everybody, no matter what stage of a career they are, but it's something you just have to deal with. There's no point in if you want people to read what you're writing or listen to what you're saying, then you have to be prepared that they might not think it's very good, and they won't be shy in telling you, and you have to accept that.
Yeah, as you said, you make your own luck. What happened with the professional football? That's quite an interesting point.
Well, one theory is that I just wasn't good enough. Another theory that I prefer is that I went to a rugby school. So I didn't really get to play very much football, and I played rugby really from that point on, as athletics and various other things that I loved. I always did loads of different sports, still do a lot of endurance events and running and triathlons and things like that. But probably I just wasn't good enough. But I'm claiming that because I went to a rugby school, I was deprived of any further opportunity.
I think it was your brother played professional football?
He did, yeah. So he got. I still enjoyed playing football, and he got the majority of the benefit of it. I have two brothers, and Warren was 2 years younger than me. Probably not far enough removed to have the full benefit of my great coaching abilities. But Andrew, being 11 years younger than me, he could kick a ball literally before he could walk, because we would swing his arms in a big arc, and he would boot the ball up the kitchen and laugh. So he was. I have this theory about families that the youngest child in every family is always destined to be the top sporting performer, purely because they have the figures to look up to, and also they are literally being fully embraced in it from literally, in his case, from birth. So they've got so many more advantages, I think, and they have to always perform up and play at a higher level, because if they've got older siblings who are into it as well. And it certainly was true in his case, at least in football anyway. He's not bad at golf either, mind you.
Are you any good at golf? It's obviously a big sport in Northern Ireland.
No, I don't have the patience for it, and it irritates me. I see all that beautiful green space, and I think, God, that would be an amazing nature reserve. Why is it being cut and covered in pesticides, and grumpy old men are hitting little tiny white balls after it all the place? I quite like watching the top levels of golf. I'll try and watch the Ryder Cup usually every few years, but that's about it. In theory, it's a great game, but the tiny obsession with detail and small, silly rules, I just find irritating.
You went to rugby school, as you said. Did you have any introduction to journalism there with English?
Not really. I didn't. Well, I suppose I did a little bit. I wrote some stuff for the school magazines. I was the secretary of our rugby club and the captain as well, and so I ended up having to write a lot of the match reports and things like that, and take notes of meetings that we were supposed to have but never really did, and keep tabs on the scores. So I suppose there was some grounding there, just in terms of processing results and like I said, very bad match reports and very impartial match reports, obviously, because I was playing in most of the games. But I didn't, I suppose I wasn't focusing too much in journalism then, but equally, I like to think that I wasn't, but I did manage to get myself a week of work experience in UTV. So it must have been a stronger ambition than I remembered. But again, it was, the bigger ambition when I was a bit older was just, adventuring, whether that was in the forces or whatever it was, expeditions, that kind of thing. So, but maybe I always assumed that the media was a kind of a backup plan. At that stage at school, when you're 16, 17, you have to put some proper career down. And I just felt that was probably what I put down, without really being that bothered about whether it happened or not, because I had these other ideas. So it was, to some extent, it was a plan B. But I took it seriously enough to actually to go to write off to UTV and to have to live in Belfast for a week, which was big enough experience for a kid from Enniskillen. Really, I had an aunt and uncle up in Belfast, so that helped. And there was a Fermanagh reporter, Fergal McKinney, at UTV at the time, so that helped me to get in there. I wrote to him and then wrote to that company, to UTV as well. And it was grand. I didn't really particularly fall in love with television or anything when I was in there. A lot of it I found it quite boring, but I think any work experience is boring because you're not actually able to do the job. And it wasn't like I was going on and reading the news or anything. You're just kind of sitting there and watching people do stuff. And I didn't really get any sense that it was particularly glamorous, but it was probably a little bit more glamorous and more exciting than most other work experience roles that my friends were on at the time. So it was probably better than the dreaded normal, inverted commas, 9 to 5. But I didn't really take proper steps towards that until, like I said earlier, until I was in second year at university.
And at UTV, what kind of broadcasting were you exposed to? Did you have to write or anything, or was it, as you said, just sitting and watching what they did there?
Well, in the work experience, it was mostly just watching. But when I went there later, again, that was another strangely fortuitous break. I had been, once when I came out of university, I sort of thought, right, well, what do we do now? The next thing that was on the horizon was the Sydney Olympics in 2000. That's how old I am, how long ago this was. I graduated in the summer of 2000. The Sydney Olympics, I think, was in September, October. I had previously lived in Sydney for a year. I took a gap year between school and uni, off around the world for a year, and spent 9 or 10 months of that in Sydney. I always wanted to go back. I thought that was a great excuse to go back, and again, just to try and pick up some sort of work experience. I wrote off to all these newspapers locally here and just said I was paying my own way down to Sydney, and if they could help me with a press pass, I would work for nothing. And my local newspaper in Fermanagh were the biggest supporters of that. And luckily, the authorities in Sydney didn't know that the Impartial Reporter was just a small Fermanagh newspaper at the time. The Irish News, I should say, were also very supportive, and I was writing regular columns for them, which was an amazing opportunity. With no qualifications and no real right to be at that level, they were happy to take stuff from me. So. And obviously the Sydney Olympics became such a big event. I was lucky that I was there, and they were happy to give, the Irish Newses were happy to give it my columns or my pieces a little bit more profile than they would normally have done. So, and obviously they must have liked what I was writing as well. So that worked out brilliantly. I didn't get any money or anything, but what I did receive was much more valuable than that. It was bylines and photographs in the newspaper and an actual column, and just the experience of a media centre and a big event and how it all works. And at that point, that was when I really decided this is great. This is what I always thought it might have been. And it is one step away from actually running on the track, but you're able to be right beside the track, and you're meeting the athletes immediately after, and people are writing your impressions of it. And the best thing was all of the things that the Sydney Tourism Board put on. You could basically go anywhere you wanted in the city for free, and I got a first class train ride from Sydney to Perth and a flight back, and it just was amazing. And I was writing for my local paper. It became then travel articles, which was another dream, something I'd always wanted to do, as well as the Irish news stuff. And then the Irish News asked me to stay on for the Paralympics, and it was the first sort of big Paralympics event. People forget that it didn't always get the amazing coverage and quite right, justly coverage that it gets now. But Sydney kind of changed that. The Paralympics was almost on a par with the Olympics in terms of the amount of media exposure and television coverage it generated. And I just thought it was the most amazing event. And they said they would pay me if I stayed on for that. So that was my first kind of paid job in journalism, was the articles I was writing for the Irish News and Rugby World, weirdly, because they were interested in wheelchair rugby, murder balls called in America. So I stayed on and covered that for them, and it sort of just grew from there, and I started writing more often and just annoying people and constantly sending off CVs and articles that I'd written, and I really wanted to. That was when I decided that whatever shape or form it took, I wanted to be in the media from that point. So that it's a kind of a long story, this, but then when I came back from Sydney, I kind of reluctantly came home. I didn't really have a plan. And I was sort of milling around a little bit, to be honest, and getting frustrated with that. But the local paper, the Impartial Reporter in Enniskillen that I had been writing for, again, luckily, I'd sort of kept in touch with them, and they had 2 reporters that left within a month. And they said, look, would you come in and fill in for a few months? And, that was a sort of almost full-time job, albeit at that point only for 2 months. So I went in and loved it. I enjoyed the discipline of local news reporting. And as they explained it to me, it's a really brilliant grounding, because the people that you're writing about, you're going to bump into them in the street. So if you misquote them, or if you write something that's untrue, or if you're unfair or unbalanced, they can literally stop you in the street, probably go to the same pubs that you do, probably know your family, so that I found that was a really good discipline and really good grounding. And again, I didn't have any, formal qualifications at that time, but the full-time job then came up in that paper. And I wasn't sure about going for it, because I didn't have a journalism master's or a postgrad or anything. And the editor said, well, you've been doing this job for 2 months, so I don't need a piece of paper to tell me you can do it. You've already been doing it. So I got the job, which was great. And I had a brilliant time. I stayed there 1.5 years. And just as I was beginning to think, right, where am I going to go now with this? I was in Belfast, and I wasn't in Belfast that often in those days. I was doing a story up there randomly, and literally walked past the guy selling the Belfast Telegraph, who shouted me in my ear, and I just sort of bought one on impulse. And on the back page, there was an advert for a trainee sports reporter in UTV. And I'd never bought the Belfast Telegraph in my life. And I kind of took this as a great omen, a great sign, and I applied for it, and I got that job. So that was how I got started in TV.
That was a bit of luck, wasn't it?
Totally. And that's 100% true. It's as random as walking into the Students' Union magazine. And being given the job of sports editor after 30 seconds, and I do think there's a great element of luck in a lot of careers. But again, the more, that I could sit here and tell you about, 100 emails that I sent that have never been replied to this day. So I think the more doors you knock, you're bound, the chances are one of them is bound to open, even if only slightly, open wide enough to allow you to kick the door, kick the rest of it in, so I suppose I still had to have the gumption to apply for that job without any broadcast experience whatsoever at that point. And went up for interview, and I didn't find it scary at all. Weirdly, just thought this is just basically an extension of newspaper stuff, and my glittering Loughborough campus radio career might be of some assistance here, which it wasn't. But about 3 weeks later, UTV phoned me up and told me I got that job, and it was kind of perfect because again, it was the idea of it being a trainee role. They weren't looking for someone that had 3 years broadcast experience or any qualifications. It was a sort of trainee position. Wasn't that much training, to be quite honest. You sort of learned on the job. It was sink or swim. But again, absolutely invaluable experience because you're just thrown into it. You're on local news, and at that point, when was that? Early sort of 2003, 2004. Local news was massive. UTV would have had 40 odd% audience share every night, which is that's even in a small place like Northern Ireland, that's a lot of people, and a lot of people that you bump into, and a lot of people that you have to account for yourself to after the broadcast is finished. You don't get anything wrong.
And I guess going back a bit as well, your free work where you started off with, I've spoken on the past 2 episodes with Ade Oladipo and Connie McLaughlin about the importance of free work to gain experience, because I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, like there should be no such thing as free work and all this sort of thing. But if you need to get the experience, you really do need to do it. What's your sort of thoughts on free work, and how important is it for students who want to break into the industry to do free work?
I don't see that there's any other option, to be quite honest with you, Richard, because, certainly in my case, if I hadn't proven to people that I could already do it by doing it for free, then I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I did get. The Irish News were never going to allow me to represent them in Sydney if I hadn't sent them articles that I'd already written. If I hadn't, and the Students' Union magazine at Loughborough wasn't going to pay anybody, obviously, so you'd no option but to write for free. So I don't see how anybody gets around that, really. And I don't think, it's all very well. I think, listen, journalism qualifications and postgrads and all that are amazing, and for particular roles that you want to do, you can't do without it. If I wanted to be a court reporter or an investigative journalist, 100% I'd need to go and do a journalism course. Luckily, I was in something more frivolous like sport and travel writing, so I probably didn't need it, but I still needed to prove that I could do it, and nobody was going to give me the opportunity to prove I could do it by paying me while I was proving it. You have to prove it and then get paid, and I'm not sure that there's any way around that, really, especially in such a competitive industry where the person that has worked for 2 years for free, learning their trade and writing articles and doing podcasts and broadcasting, 2 things: A, they prove they have a hunger for it, and B, they're building experience all that time and they're getting better. And it's like anything else, it's practice, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. So if I was employing somebody, I would want to see that they put the time in, A, to see that they're keen, and B, just because I know they're better now than they were 2 years ago whenever they started.
Exactly, because you obviously went off to the Olympics, probably had a great time, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, that was amazing. I could write a book about it. It was just fantastic. And again, the event was obviously brilliant, but I didn't have, it wasn't like I didn't have an access to all areas media pass. They had so many media there. They had a media centre out at Homebush at the games at the main arena, and then they had another sort of spillover media centre right in the centre of the city. And that was for people like me. I had to then apply again for any specific event that I wanted. I couldn't just go anywhere. But I had access to all the press conferences. I had access to all of the results coming through. I had access to all of the other media who would come into the media centre. But more importantly, that's the tourism place. The tourism people were all in the spillover media centre. And because I didn't have 5 deadlines a day or anything like that, I was able to just wander around and to chat to them and see what was available and sell little colour stories around the place. So I ended up just taking everything that was going. Plus I had no money and I needed to eat. So they were putting on restaurant tips. I was on every single, even though I already lived in Sydney, I was on every restaurant and pub exploration tour that was going, climbed the Harbour Bridge for nothing. Definitely the biggest coup was the train ride. Like that's a 5-day or 4-day train ride. From Sydney to Perth, I can't remember what it is, 88 hours or something like that. and it was all free, meals, drinks, everything, So it was the fact that I could eat somewhere for whatever 3.5, 4 days was one of the major selling points. But and again, I realized that there's no better industry for harvesting experiences. If you want to go for them, that, and I've found that has for me been the highlight of working in television or working in the media in general over the last 25 years. Not 23 years. It's just been the experiences that are afforded to you, are a privilege, and they make up for some of the difficult times. It is a difficult industry to get into. It's a difficult industry to stay into. It's frustrating. It's obviously subjective, and you're subject to the whims of commissioners and editors and others. But it's very rewarding if you put enough effort into it, and if you're curious about the world and you're pretty keen to just grab whatever experience you can get, then there's very few industries that will afford you with more opportunity.
How much time would you say you put into your sport media work? What's your work-life balance like
now?
Yeah.
Not as, obviously, quite clearly not as much as it was when I was at GTV and I was full time. I left there, I think maybe 2004, no, it must be 2005 or 2006. I was 3.5 years there. And again, I'm kind of restless anyway, and I just felt freelancing suited me better at that time, certainly when I didn't have a mortgage and 3 kids like I do now. And it's just the nature of my personality, I suppose. I wanted to do more traveling. I wanted to do more documentaries. I wanted to experiment in different longer form storytelling. That was essentially a sports news role. Our main priority was the UTV live news every night, which was 7 or 8 minutes of sport that had to be filled. But again, you could work all day on a story and it would be out for 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, and then it's gone. You start again from scratch again in the morning. Again, that's a good discipline, and there's lots of live television opportunity, and that was brilliant. But I felt like I wanted to get my teeth into some bigger projects, and I was happy to go freelance and to keep picking up whatever news media work I could get. They were happy to pay me as a freelance on weekends and other days when people were sick. And I was able to do a bit of radio stuff, and I ended up working at Setanta Sports, as it was then in Dublin. They were looking for a rugby presenter and a GAA presenter, Gaelic football. So I did that for them for a while. One horrendous day, I did 3 games in a row, 2 rugby matches and 1 Gaelic football match, which I would never want to repeat that. That's a marathon, in different sports. It was awful, but again, just great to absorb more and more live broadcast experience. I don't know how many hours of live television I've done now. It's pretty big. But I kind of, when you go freelance, it's either I feel that you've got to be able to spread yourself quite thin, unless you have a specialism. If you're a freelance cycling reporter, for example, but even then you need to be doing writing, you need to be doing podcasting, you need to be doing radio, you need to be able to hoover up all of these returnable work. It's not enough just to sit and wait for the phone to ring, because no one can make a living at that. So I wanted to have that sort of sports presenting part and my writing and everything else, but to have more concrete things. So we have a couple of other businesses as well. I have a production company, and that's probably the vast majority of my time and income now. Whereas media presenting, sports presenting, I don't know if I put a figure on it, probably maybe 15%, something like that, of both income and time, maybe less. And again, it's I was at Sky Sports News as a freelance for 3.5, 4 years, and I could have gone over there and done that full time, but it just didn't suit me at that time to move to London with young children. And again, I'm not sure that I wanted to be doing the one thing all the time every day. I'm a bit restless, and I enjoy having a much wider scope and much wider variety in life in general and working life in particular. So it's probably no more than 10 to 15% of my income and work time at the moment. And
your business, MPE Media, how did that idea come about? What inspired
it? Basically, like the same thing. I always wanted variety, and that's been, I realize now, right throughout my life. I've never really been. It's a fault in some respects. I struggle just to focus on one thing and one thing only, and most people who are very successful have that ability. or are willing enough to do that. I have never either had that ability nor really been willing enough to focus succinctly on just one thing. So I created a company that would basically be a sort of a media services company. We would do everything. I could host events, we could make documentaries, we make commercial video for people, we do live streaming. It's the company through which I get rented out, I suppose, as a presenter or a writer or a TV producer. So it's a little bit of everything, and that's when I went freelance. It was just me, and then I said, well, I need a company for a lot of this stuff, for insurance reasons, for VAT reasons, for all this other boring adult stuff. So I set up the limited company then. So we've had that company now, I don't know, 15 years, something like that, and it's really only myself and my wife, and then we bring in freelancers when we need them. I don't really want to be in a position of carrying a load of staff. And I think a lot of companies are probably going down that road now. The standard of freelancers is so good, particularly, and in a small place like Northern Ireland, it's kind of word of mouth. I know who I want to work with because I've worked with them for years. And if they're not available, I'll ring somebody else who recommends somebody else, and I'll probably know them anyway. So that works far better for me. In the job, if we have a document, like we've just finished a historical documentary for the BBC, that was probably 7-8 months of my time, but I only needed camera crew for really 3 weeks. I only needed an editor for 2.5 months. So rather than me holding their salaries for a whole year, I'm happy to pay them a little bit extra for that short period of time. And then if there's no more work, they're not my problem. They can go and work somewhere else, and I'll hopefully get them back whenever I need them again if they're free.
How do you go about pitching a documentary to the likes of the BBC for people who maybe want to do that and don't really know how to?
Yeah, that's the bit I'm not very good at. I like to think I know how to make them. I don't really seem to know how to sell them, and that's the part of the industry that nobody really enjoys. That the development period is tricky. It's the same for anybody. You put your heart and soul into something, and then a commissioner, just through no fault of their own, they just don't like the idea, even though you love it. And there's no right or wrong. It's a subjective industry. I also feel sometimes, particularly in television, however, you need to work out which box that can fit into. Every broadcaster has their own targets and their own little boxes in which you have to try and fit. They have to try and fit the shape of the channel. So it's not just that the best ideas get on the screen. It's the best ideas that fit whatever they're trying to say or whatever they're trying to do at that time. And I've never been very good at working out the machinations of that, really. So my strategy now is to try and partner with other companies who are far more successful at selling stuff than I am, and far more diligent at selling stuff than I am. And I'm hoping that's going to bear fruit later this year. We've quite a lot of projects in development with bigger and better companies that will basically they will do a lot of the kind of heavy lifting in terms of the relationships with commissioners and the paperwork that the BBC love in particular. And Channel 4, they love a bit of paperwork. And if I can get other people to help me with that part, I can concentrate on the bits that I want to do, which is just tell stories. I think that's probably a lesson that applies to this industry in general. You've got to try and build alliances and partnerships and work out what it is you want to do and what you're good at, and see if there's some way of trying to avoid all the bits of it that you really dislike and don't want to do. There's no point in saying I want to be on Sky Sports News. If you like presenting, then you're going to be in the studio. That's what you want to go for. If you like presenting, but you don't want to go out and get frozen standing outside West Ham every transfer window, then sports news reporting is not for you. So you need to, I think, identify what it is that you want to do, what you'll accept on the way to there. I think you need it's difficult to get a clear focus on what you want to do, particularly for someone like me. So I was happy to sort of drift, and I've had great experiences without really zeroing in on one thing. I'm probably the exception to that rule, really. I think you're better off to be, I want to be a reporter, or I want to be a presenter, or I want to be an editor. Although having said that now, everybody that I work with can do loads of things. I'm the only one who can hardly do anything. There's guys I work with can shoot, they can edit, they can audio mix, they can sound record, they can do everybody, particularly technical skills, I think is very important now. It wasn't so important for me growing up. You could just be a reporter or a scriptwriter or a presenter, whereas I think now everybody seems to need some sort of technical ability as well.
And when creating these documentaries, what type of freelancers would you get? How involved are you with it? Do you just sort of do the background work, or do you maybe get on a camera or present? Or
No, well, I do some of the stuff. A lot of our our travel things and our corporate work. A lot of our online stuff for Tourism Ireland and Tourism Northern Ireland and the National Trust, people like that, I would, if it needs a presenter, I'd rather pay myself just to do it. And I'm always available when I'm available, so it's a lot easier. Other BBC projects, for example, we work with a couple of different presenters that I bring in, and I produce them personally. And I try to do everything. We don't have the luxury yet of me being able to win a commission and just get somebody else to make it. I've got to make it pay. If we're getting one documentary every year or 2 a year or whatever it is, I've got to be the person doing all the work. And that's just me anyway. I want to, if it's a story that I want to tell, I want to be involved in every single detail of it. But I mean, delegation is a skill. I'm not particularly good at it, but I've learned that, it's particularly with historical docs, because they are big, heavy beasts of productions, and the level of detail that you have to go into is serious. You do need help in that. I would be, from this point on, I'll be, appointing an archive producer, for example, the one we've just finished, which is a historical doc about a former Prime Minister of the UK whose folks were from Coleraine here in County Antrim. I spent, I don't know, weeks, months probably, pouring through archive, photographs, videos. I'd have been better off getting somebody else to do that quicker and better, and I could have worked harder on other aspects of the doc, or at looking ahead and what's coming after it, because that's one of the big problems with freelancing is, you do that job and then you start again the next day and you've got nothing. So you've got to try and always have a pipeline of steady work that you can rely on. I'm fortunate with presenting. I have, a good relationship still with Sky Sports. I always know there's going to be Irish League games every season for the foreseeable future, and the same with Premier Sports with the rugby I present. It's not a lot, but it's probably, 15 games a year of football. It's maybe less, 12 of football at Sky and maybe 15 rugby at Premier. So I know that's always there, because with the documentaries, you make one doc, you put your life and soul into for 7 or 8 months, you deliver it, and then that's it. There's no continuous payment off the back of that. The dream is to get a series, a returnable series, but everyone's after those.
When you report every so often for Sky Sports or Premier Sports, what's it like ending up in front of a camera after maybe working on a documentary? Do you have to readjust much?
Yeah, it's difficult. It is very difficult. I call it match fitness. It's the same as as playing. If you haven't done it for a few weeks, a few months, I feel, for me anyway, it's obvious. I don't feel as natural. You trip over your words a little bit. It's harder to memorize lines that you want to put in there. It's just you get out of the habit of the flow, especially if you're working for 2 different broadcasters and 2 different productions. I had a day a few weeks ago when I was doing an Irish League game live on Sky Sports Football. I think actually it was on Sky Sports main event, 12:30 in Belfast. It was Crusaders against Larne. Then I had to jump in the car, take all of the woolies off that I was wearing because it was freezing. That was an outside gig, standing pitch side. Get changed into something more respectable, drive down to Dublin. I had an hour to get in my head into a rugby match, and I was presenting a Munster versus Leinster, I think it was, in a studio in Dublin that same day. So that is tricky. It went okay as it was, because I'd put in the time doing the prep in the days before. But I do find it difficult if I don't do it. If I do a rugby match and then I don't do another one for a month. I find that difficult. If I'm doing them every couple of weeks, then you definitely get into a rhythm with it. And the same with the football. It was the same, at Sky Sports News. I was maybe, occasionally doing 7 or 8 nights in a row. And by the 8th night, everything is routine, automatic. You're much sharper. You know the producers, the directors, exactly how everything's working. So to kind of parachute into it once every so often is definitely a challenge. Especially then when if I'm in the middle of a heavy workload with documentary productions or development or whatever else, that's always a distraction in your head. Excuse me, that's always a distraction. And also you're mentally tired. It's exhausting. Doing those live broadcasting is exhausting, no matter what anyone tells you. It's pure concentration. You've got to listen in one ear. You've got to listen. There's somebody speaking in this ear. There's somebody else speaking in this ear. You've got to analyze stuff. You've got to move. Things go wrong. You've really got to be on your toes. So I do find it tiring. And if I'm going into it, it's nighttime games as well, which sort of annoys me, because I usually have a day's work and then I go and do that as well. So yeah, it can be tricky, but I don't see any other way around it, to be honest. I can't have that variety. You can't have it every which way. I don't, there's not enough work in it for me to do that only. So I've got to do this other work. and I don't want to give up the presenting because A, I enjoy it, and B, like it's always good to keep your hand in. You never know when you're going to need it, more than anything else. I had a brilliant experience when it was the end of August or start of September when the rugby came back to Pro 14. I was doing a semi-final in the Aviva Stadium. I think it was Ulster-Leinster. And that game kicked off, I think, at, say, 7:30. It's obviously 2 hours for me from Dublin up to here in Bangor. I had to do that live match. So I was getting back in here at midnight, and at 4:30 that morning, cameraman was arriving here at the house because we were going out to shoot a small short film for the One Show. We made a film about a guy trying to swim across the North Channel from Scotland to Ireland. So at 4:30, I literally got back here about 4:15 midnight. I was in bed at 1:15. 3 hours later, I was getting up. The cameraman was coming here, and I was on the boat going over to Scotland at 5:30 that morning for what we thought was going to be 14, 15 hours in a tiny little rib, crossing back from Scotland to Ireland, watching somebody swimming with dolphins jumping all around them and, jellyfish and just that variety. I don't think that there's any other industry that I could get that in, so it's exhausting, but it's also exhilarating. Just the juxtaposition of those two positions, live television to, shooting on location in the middle of the North Channel, literally a few hours apart. Those are special.
And for those broadcasts that are at short notice, how would you prepare for those? Do you have a certain strategy?
Yeah, the strategy is always over prep. No matter how brief you think it is, like the Sky Sports format at the moment for the Irish League football is, it's really undemanding in theory for me. I'm only on air for, 3 or 4 minutes at the start of the game. They do nothing at half time and I'm 3 or 4 minutes at the end. But I just know from experience, if I didn't prep for that fully, something will go wrong. And suddenly there's a 10-minute delay to kick off and I'm having to fill 10 minutes. And if I haven't looked at it, researched it and learnt it, I have nothing to say. And that is the biggest fear of any presenter, to be standing looking down the lens or the barrel of a camera and not to have anything to say. You just have to do your prep. So that's the thing, no matter how the short note. And if someone says, okay, you need to go live in 5 minutes, I would frantically cram for that 5 minutes. And if I didn't feel that I knew anything of what I was talking about, I wouldn't be going through with it. I think live broadcasting is always difficult, but it's a lot easier if you know what you're talking about and if you've done your prep. If I'm driving to Kingspan Stadium to do a live game at Premier Sports, I'm usually quite relieved. When 4:30 or 5 o'clock comes and I have to go there, I'm quite relieved because I've put the day in. I've got the information that I need. I've processed it. I know what's in the running order. I've printed out the running order, and I'm ready. There's always sort of 2 hours of wandering about and rehearsals and all that crack. And usually by the time we go on air, I get this kind of sense of ease almost. I relax into it because I know that I'm ready for it. And I would never want to be going on air in any other way. It can be nerve-wracking enough, and it's considerably easier if you know what you're doing. I wouldn't like to think of the stress it would cause you if you didn't know what was happening, what was coming next, and if you weren't prepared. So that's the key lesson. I think you just got to do your prep and know your stuff.
And what sort of mindset do you have when you go to present live on TV? Do you think I'm speaking to hundreds or thousands of people here, or do you think I'm speaking to the camera and I'm speaking to my guests?
I think you can't allow yourself to think too much about too much beyond the job that you're there to do. If you're thinking that there's 100,000 people watching this, so it's less than that probably in the rugby, but whatever that figure is, I never thought like that. Sky Sports News was a big broadcast, big network, and I never bothered thinking about that, especially not just before I was going on air or while I was on air. I think it would probably get into your head too much. It's important just to be relaxed. And in that regard, again, it's the same as the players will tell you the same thing. They go through the same routine, whether there's nobody watching or whether there's millions of people watching worldwide on television. They try to zone all that out and just focus on the game and their own performance. And I do think it's the same in broadcast. I put the same effort into the rehearsal as I do when we go on air. I try to make them both the same so that there's a feeling of familiarity when you're on air. And before you know it, it's over. That's the other thing. It's, as someone said to me about television, you don't even have something to wrap your chips in at the end. In the old days, newspapers, that's what you used to put your chips in. So after the article was read, it had a second life, even just holding people's chips. Whereas with television, it goes out. If someone missed it, it's gone in live TV. So I do kind of love that about live television too. I think the mindset as well that I try to remember now, when I'm getting old and cynical, I do try to remember that it is a privilege, that not very many people get to do it, and that particularly, now with Sky Sports and Premier Sports, people are paying to watch us. So they're paying for a product that they expect to be really good. So I kind of do feel it's beholden on us to make sure the product they're getting is worth paying for. Because a lot of people will take it out on us if they think the show's rubbish. It's our fault because we're the most visible part of that show. So we do put effort into whatever it is we're doing, particularly in the rugby, where there's a half-hour build-up to the game that I'm doing on Friday, and we will put a lot of effort into that. And rightly so. Why would we not? And we feel better for that. I enjoy what we do there in Premier, and I enjoy crafting a program that I would want to watch if I was at home. So that's the kind of mindset that I have. I try to ask questions that I think people would want to ask if they were in my shoes. I try to represent, their feelings. You have to be impartial, but also you have to convey an element of excitement. I'm excited about this game because people at home are excited about this game. So I always try to also to convey a feeling of what it's like to be there at that time, whether it's, the current situation, which is where it's very strange because there's no fans and there's no atmosphere, and we don't hear the piped in atmosphere that you do at home. The stadiums are silent. You know that, Richard, if you're still getting to go to them. It's really quite weird. It feels like a practice game, but it's, I did the Pro 14 final, the Leinster-Munster game in the Aviva. That was, the biggest game of the Irish rugby season, and there was nobody there. There's 200 people in the whole stadium, and no fanfare. Really, really quite strange. So I feel it's my job to convey that to people. So in terms of the mindset, I try to work out what I think people would want to hear and want to be experiencing if they were sitting in my shoes. And I try never to lose sight of the enormous privilege that it is, especially now, to be pitch side at a live game when nobody else can.
And with no fans in the stadium, has that affected the way you present much, or do you still put the exact same amount of excitement and energy into what you would have done before?
It's not as easy. Pardon me. It's not as easy now. It definitely, when there's, fans bring so much to an event, and I think we're only realizing that now. And that's why you'll see, particularly in rugby, the players are slapping each other in the back and shouting in each other's faces and congratulating each other for just doing their simple, normal, routine job in a match. And that is about them trying to inject atmosphere into an area that has no atmosphere. And it's a little bit the same for us. I think we have got to try and enhance our offering and just try to elevate our chats a little bit and bring the excitement onto the screen when there's nothing happening behind us. We're lucky because we're pitch side at Premier most of the time. It's the players are warming up 10, 15 meters away, so that helps. But it's definitely weird not having people around the ground. In some respects, it's a little bit easier because there's nobody, so close to you staring at you, which I do find a little bit off-putting. Even though there's everyone staring at us on screen, it's not quite the same as having people, in my eye line of the camera waving and mooning or whatever it is they like to do. So in that respect, it's easier. There's less distractions for us. But equally, there's no one making noise either. You can hear everything. You can hear your own voice. You can hear when you move. You can hear the players screaming and shouting at each other. So it's very different. But hopefully, it's not going to last much longer. And I'm trying to make notes on it as I go because I think it's a horrible time for people. But it's again, it's a privilege to be broadcasting through this because I'm hoping that nobody ever has to do it again.
Hopefully, we get to the end of it soon. You mentioned earlier about having to cover 3 games in different sports in the same day. How did you sort of manage that? And did you know a lot about each of the sports, or have you ever covered a sport that you didn't know much about but had to present or report on?
Well, I thought I'd managed it well until I got to the very, very end, my very final line in that entire mammoth day, and I added up the score in the Gaelic football game wrong without realising it. And the producer whispered it in my ear, no, that's wrong. So I thought I had done it well until that point. So, there's just further evidence that you just need to concentrate the whole way through, which someone as flighty as me finds very, very difficult. That was difficult. It's definitely easier, like I said earlier, when you're into the swing of the routine of one sport and one producer, one director, and the people involved. You're in a flow of it. It's very difficult then to change gear and go into a completely different sport, albeit at that point that was in the same studio. It was, I knew rugby, I knew Gaelic reasonably well, having covered it for 2 or 3 years, but probably not well enough to be a presenter, which was why that was a much more pressured role, and I only lasted in it a couple of months. So that was tricky. I've talked a lot about sports that I haven't a clue about cricket. Being the most obvious, Sky Sports News was, I always felt, probably 50% football, and maybe particularly in the summer another 25% cricket. And I have never played cricket. I didn't know anything about it. Again, I find it a game that's mostly based on mathematical scores, and I'm number blind, so I would see all these graphics coming up and I wouldn't have a clue what any of them meant. So that was difficult, and I just had to sort of fudge my way through. The only thing that made it better was when I used to work with Jim White, because he knew even less about cricket than I did. So it was always really funny, the two of us battling not to do it. But if it was 10 games in a row and you had to flip flop between them, you ended up having to give updates. So we just always tried to turn it into a chat and not pretend that it was something either of us knew a lot about. I think people are very, very quick to spot if you're bluffing and waffling. So a lot of the time, I would just tell them what was on the screen. You can see for yourself what's happening. The director would tell me who's in the ascendancy. I would repeat that, mention a couple of names that I'd read about in the newspapers that day. Whatever the color of a story, I was always good at bringing out the color of an event, even if I didn't really understand the intricacies and the mechanics of the event. If I knew that one team hadn't won for 7 games and their manager or head coach was under pressure, I would have concentrated on that, because I know how to tell that story. I didn't, without being able to, tell how many, what was the important run rate and the chase and all that stuff. I didn't know that, but I at least knew what was at stake for both teams normally. So I think that's important, because that's something that applies to any sport. You just need to know the biography of an event, and that'll get you through it. And if you don't know the intricacies of scrummaging or the offside rule, don't go on about it. Just don't talk about it. Talk more again about the colour and what's important, and the human interest parts, because that's why we watch. We don't watch sport to learn about the stats. We watch sport because there's human interest, and there's personalities and characters. That's what makes it so compelling. So those are always the things that I focused on.
And what's it like presenting for Sky Sports News specifically? Because I assume that's different from presenting on the likes of a match, or a football match or a rugby match, with you having to read an auto cue for your whole slot time, and you're having someone in your ear, and then sometimes you're having to chat to people. How do you sort of switch in between those things?
Yeah, again, I haven't done it for quite a while, and I was kind of felt that my time was up there. I didn't have any great long-term ambition to be doing it forever. And some people do, and they love it. It's great, but I like to be out on location a lot more than that. I think the staff that were in there were brilliant. The producers and the directors, again, they're doing it every day, so they're aware of the format of it. But they knew whenever I was in trouble, or they knew I needed help at the start, especially because I'd never even watched the program when I first went on it. I'd never even seen it, which was a bit of an issue. But they talked me through it, and they were brilliant. And the presenters that I work with were fantastic in there as well. So supportive. Jim was brilliant to me. There's so many guys in there that were really helpful to me. The Julians that were in there were brilliant. It's a fun place, but it's also, they are churning out a lot of information all the time. There's a break for, I think, maybe 6 hours usually in the evening. It stops at midnight, and that's the show from 11 to midnight is repeated until 6 a.m. That's the way it used to be when I was there anyway. And other than that, they are generating news and reporting news all the time. It's a massive operation, and it's incredibly successful. And I'm still amazed at how they pull it all together, because they were the first people to do that. So it's extraordinary. And again, it was a privilege to be involved in that for the short period of time that I was. And yeah, I find some elements of that, not so challenging, and other elements that I found very difficult. I found it difficult to keep pace with constantly updating football matches, and especially cricket matches, because I didn't understand the sport. I did a couple of those, like the Tuesday nights and Wednesday nights, when you're doing live games and there might be 30 games on and you're throwing to 7 different reporters and updating it. I found that tricky, just to keep tabs on everything that was happening, plus other news stories that might have been breaking. I've never had any bother reading auto cue. It's a real, I quite enjoy it. I find that a really comfortable armchair ride, but not all presenting can be like that, I was lucky that a lot of the time I was on Sky Sports News was towards the end of the day, and a lot of the main events would have been done, and then a lot of it was just auto cue stuff. And sometimes that got boring, and anyone who works there who told you otherwise would be lying. Everyone finds that it's difficult to deal with sometimes because it is very repetitive by nature of the fact you've had a whole day of news and you just need to keep turning it over every 15 minutes. But when there's something that breaks, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And that's what the channel was about. They always said to me, it's a news channel first and foremost. They love, for example, bad weather. If there's bad weather putting games in doubt, everyone's tuning into Sky Sports News to see whether that goes ahead. And they are unparalleled at generating a buzz around that sort of thing. So I enjoyed that. I was on one night and David Beckham broke a bone in his foot, I think, and then was out of, I can't remember whether it was a European Championships or a World Cup or something, or his involvement in it was in doubt. I think he was at AC Milan at the time. And that was genuinely a big sports story, It was a big news story. I'm sure it was on the front page of the newspapers the next day too. So to be involved in breaking that news to the nation, I suppose, was a big honour and a privilege, and I loved it. I really enjoyed that because I felt that this was an important story that we had the responsibility of telling well. Obviously the updates are coming in thick and fast, but they're also, you can never lose sight of the fact that you are just talking about one person hurting his toe. But equally there is a sense of importance about that one person hurting his toe in the nation that you have to buy into. So I always had a sort of healthy skepticism about a lot of the stuff that we were reporting as earth-shattering news, but it was also a privilege to be conveying what everybody else thought was important.
Yeah, it's certainly an incredible show, Sky Sports. You're obviously a presenter as well. At university, you said you mainly wrote and you were on the radio. Did you have any exposure in front of a camera at university, or how did you practice?
None at all. The first time I was in front of a camera was at UTV, which was, I found really unsettling. I didn't like it at all, actually, at first. Probably because I didn't have any practice in it at all. I was happy reading scripts. I was happy because I'd done a little bit of radio. I was happy doing doing voiceovers and that kind of stuff. I wasn't self-conscious about that. I don't like listening to those voiceovers now. I hate them. The way I was reading it, appalling. But I didn't, at that time, I thought I was okay at it. But I knew at that time that I was hopeless in front of the camera. I just found it, it's very unnatural. You're looking at a sort of reflection of yourself in a tiny black screen. And there's nothing there to help. There's no human emotion coming back to you. So it is quite unnatural and quite unsettling, and I was pretty hopeless at it for quite a long time. And then you used to it and you pick up little knacks and tips. I always thought it was good if you can kind of see your own reflection or kind of concentrate on your own reflection on the screen. At least you're seeing something. You're not just looking into this ether which sucks all the thoughts out of your head and leaves you with nothing to say. At least you're able to see yourself or some sort of human shape. And I found that helped a little bit. And when I do games as well, I try not to focus too intent. You've got to obviously look down the lens, otherwise you look bizarre looking all around the place, like Frank Lampard when he's been interviewed and he's scratching his head and it doesn't look good. You do have to focus and look into the camera, but try not to look too intently. Otherwise, I think you look too seriously. You look too serious. It's always a good idea just to remind yourself to smile as well. But it took me a long time to pick up all those little hints and tips that make it a little bit easier. I'm fairly comfortable with it now, but there's still, there is still everybody gets that little moment of butterflies, no matter how much live television they've done. And I think if you weren't getting that, it would affect your performance because it would feel like you didn't care. And if you didn't really care, it would be quite obvious you didn't care. And you'd make mistakes or you'd get sloppy or people just wouldn't want to watch you.
And when you weren't working as well, when you were at home, did you ever practice, speak to your mirror or speak to something as if it was the camera just to practice being in front of a camera, I guess?
No, but I wish I had done. I think now there's much more facility for people to do that because everybody is recording themselves anyway on Instagram or whatever it is. So I think that a lot more people now are much more comfortable talking to camera than they would have been back when I was learning it 20 years ago. It wasn't something that I ever really did. And I do think it's like anything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. So I would think if anybody has got ambitions in broadcast journalism or to work in television, just get a camera and talk to it and record it and look back and critique yourself, send it to somebody, work out how you do it better. and just do it more often. And the more you do it, you definitely get better at it. There are very few people who are natural at it from the start. Some people are, but there's not that many of them. I certainly wasn't one of them.
And with your business creating documentaries and things like that, did you learn how to use a camera or how to edit video or anything like that as well? Or is it always sort of the presenting side? And
no, again, I should have, you can come unstuck if you don't have all of those skills. So that day that I was telling you about, whenever I was doing the Pro 14 semi-final and then straight up to do the North Channel program for the One Show, the cameraman got seasick after about 2 hours out in the boat, and the guy that was trying to swim was getting colder and colder, and he eventually got out after 3 hours, but my cameraman was too ill to pick up the camera. So I had to take up the camera and just put everything on auto focus, auto settings, and I didn't have a tripod because we were on a tiny boat. So, and I always say to myself, I need to learn this stuff. I need to learn this stuff. And I never do. I'm fortunate always to have people who can do it better than me. But I do, I wish I knew more of the technical stuff. Like editing is a great skill. I can edit audio pieces and things like that, but it takes me ages. I'm better. It doesn't yet pay me to learn how to do it when there's somebody else that can do it far better and far quicker than me. But if I was doing news pieces and I wanted to do more online stuff, if I was going to set up a podcast or a YouTube page or something like that, then I would learn it, because it saves a lot of money and a lot of hassle if you can do most of this stuff yourself. I just haven't learned it at this point. I can just about turn on the camera, but I know a little bit of the language and the chat around it, but I don't fully understand it. And I'm happy to get somebody who's, particularly for documentaries, you need someone who can shoot properly to craft those and to make them look good. And it would take me far too long to get anywhere near their standard.
And you did radio at university, obviously. Did you ever work in radio professionally? And how different is radio from television presented?
I did a little bit. When I was at GTV, they bought a radio station, or set up a radio station in Belfast called U105, and I did a little bit as part of my role as a reporter in there on TV at the time. And then when I went freelance, I got, I used to do a few days a week sometimes as the sort of sports reporter. And there was I think there was maybe only 5 bulletins in a day, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the discipline of radio, and I still do, and I don't get to do enough of it. And it's kind of on my hit list of things that I want to concentrate on, especially now, the podcast world has completely changed all of that. There's some amazing content out there, and I love it. I think sometimes with television, the picture, what I want to do really is just tell stories, and the pictures get in the way of that a lot of the time. In TV, you can't tell the story if you don't have the pictures that help you to tell the story, whereas that doesn't apply in radio. You create the pictures through your descriptions and through your voice. So I want to do a lot more of that. There's no doubt. If there's anybody watching this who can offer me some work in radio, go ahead. And I think it's a fantastic discipline. I think with television, you have to write very sparely, and you have to let the pictures speak. You don't want to speak over the pictures. There's no point. That's the whole idea, is that the pictures are there. Whereas with radio, you've got to convey all of the description. And I enjoy that. I like talking, I like writing, I like telling people about experiences that I've had or things that I'm seeing. So I do feel that's a more natural home for me than TV. Especially with television production is complicated and stressful. The amount of people that you need to go with you, the amount of things that have to go right, whether it's weather, sound, everything can go wrong. It's difficult and stressful, and I find it very frustrating a lot of the time. And I think a lot of those frustrations don't apply to radio, because you can record it. The backdrop isn't so important. If it's too noisy outside, you go inside. You don't need to spend 2 hours lighting it. You just record it. So I feel there's probably a lot more freedom with radio and podcasting that I don't feel is in television a lot of the time. So I've done a little bit of it, but not nearly as much as I'd like.
And podcasting as well. It's obviously grown massively since it began, really. Do you think it's now bigger than radio, or do you think radio's still there?
I think it's a little bit, people say the same thing about TV. Is it dead because there's all these streaming platforms? I still think that there is an appetite for a shared live experience. And that's why live sport will always be hugely popular. And that's why live sport will always get far more ratings than documentaries about sport or magazine shows about sport, which never really rate that well. Magazine shows, I mean, because I think the excitement in sport is in the live event. So, and I think it's a little bit the same about radio. I think there's still, if someone at 7 o'clock in the morning, if someone's going to turn on some sort of audio entertainment, it'll invariably be radio, because they get the news, they get to hear what everybody else is up to, they get the traffic, they get to listen to the same song as people 100 miles away. And I think there's almost a thrill or a sense of belonging through that, which you don't get with podcasting. With podcasting, you do get it to a certain degree because people watch it and then they binge watch it and then you talk about it after. That's fine. But I still think there will definitely always be a home for live radio, whether it's sport broadcast, it's live radio, live sport on radio, or live music events on radio, or just the news or live music programming. Especially now where with digital radio, you can be pretty specific and focused about what music exactly you want to listen to. Absolute Radio, I've got, I don't know, 8 or 9 channels, different decades, different types of music, and that's still a live experience, but you're getting the kind of music that you like, and somebody else is picking it and playing it, which is also great. Otherwise you disappear down a rabbit hole of your own interests, which I don't think is healthy at all, which is a big issue with social media, in my opinion. So I think there's room for both, for sure, but definitely in terms of storytelling, podcasting is in the ascendancy, and it's just such an exciting medium. Again, I want to do more of it, and I think it's only going to grow.
And you mentioned social media there. Are you on that much yourself, or what are your thoughts on social media?
No, I'm hopeless at it. I don't like it. Never have done. I started Twitter a little bit when I was at Sky, just because everybody was doing it and it was new and exciting. I hated it. I lasted, I don't know, I did it for maybe less than a year, stopped it, started it again a couple of years ago because I wanted to do more travel writing. And I found that this is I know it's important. I know I should be doing it, but I just hate it and I don't. So I was writing a few years ago. I went to South Africa. I wanted to swim from Cape Town back into a place just beside. I wanted to swim from Robben Island back in towards Cape Town. It's a famous swim that you can do. The Mandela Swim sort of commemorates his time incarcerated at Robben Island. And I wanted to write some articles about it. So I wrote for the Irish Times and the Guardian, and I was applying for, as you do, to all of the tourism boards and hotels to get free accommodation and to get assistance on free trips and free flights and all that kind of stuff that makes the only thing that makes travel writing pay. And I was writing. The Guardian is one of the biggest newspapers in the world. The Irish Times is the most respected newspaper on this island in Ireland, and I thought that was enough. And every question was, well, what's your social media profile? How many followers have you got? How many likes do you have? And I don't do it, and they couldn't believe it. I realize I'm an outlier not doing it, but I'm comfortable enough in my own skin that I don't feel the need to be on it all the time. I think it's different if I was 21 and trying to make a name for myself as a reporter or presenter. 100%, I would suffer for not being on it, and I probably suffer a little bit now because I'm not getting any extra work or work that I haven't already got. But I'm happy with that. I'm happy that that's the balance. That if I don't do any more social media and I don't get any more presenting work, I'm happy. Anything that makes me not have to do more social media, it works for me.
Social media can be a toxic environment as well, but advice is a tricky thing as well. But is there a key piece of advice you would have for anyone looking to break into the industry, whether they're a student or whether they're looking for a career change?
Yeah, I think, we've touched on this a lot already. First of all, get comfortable in that environment. Learn how the media works, learn how a live event works, get comfortable with all of the elements to it. Just practice writing scripts, practice, work out the difference between a newspaper article and a radio script and a television script. Get comfortable in front of camera. If I had sort of thought more strongly that I wanted to do television, I would have done that earlier. You've got to work for nothing. I'm afraid that is it. There's no way around that. You need to build a profile or build some evidence that you can do the job before you can expect someone to pay you for it, especially now when it is competitive. And you need to be determined. And also, an element that people forget, you do need a modicum of talent. It's not just enough to work hard at it. If you're not good with words, or you're not good with conveying energy or interpreting an event, you're probably not going to be a good journalist. And I think a lot of people now forget that journalism is still at the heart of this industry. You need to have an appetite for telling stories, and you need to have an idea of how to do it. And if you don't have that, I think a lot of the time you'll get so far, but not as far as you otherwise would. I think everyone thinks now they can. It's a very different era now than when I was starting out 20 years ago. Effectively everyone is a broadcaster. Anytime you're tweeting or putting Instagram post or YouTube or whatever it is, you're broadcasting. So I think the lines are blurred a little bit now. So it's easy to be a broadcaster. It's a lot more difficult to get paid to properly broadcast, on a respected platform. And I think the only way to get from one to the other is by practicing, B, getting comfortable with it and knowing it, and C, I think you can learn this to a certain extent. You can learn journalism to a certain extent, but you're either good with words and good at telling stories, or you aren't. And I'm afraid that's the reality. That's level one. If you don't have that basic platform, I think it'd be much harder to move up or move on.
Some terrific advice there, Graham. It's been brilliant to have you on. Thanks very much.
You're welcome, Richard. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to episode 3 of Rich's Sports Media Show. If you enjoyed, make sure to look out for the following episode. We're also on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook if you would like to follow for regular content.